Well, good morning once again. How are you doing this morning? Bright and sunny out there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful Syracuse today.
Lovely. Well, as Deloitte consultants, it is our earnest endeavor to assist you, the FRC, in building a decision support system. At the forefront, though, and even before we proceed with this presentation, we want to share with you the structure of this presentation and the thought process in presenting this solution. Our internal mission statement was to address the interplay between FRC priorities and the stakeholder interests. And in keeping to that intent, we shared with you the decision-making rubric. Can that be shared? So yes, in keeping to that intent, this rubric has been shared with you. How is this presentation structured? Well, Chris will take you through the priorities of the decision support system and the stakeholder interests at play. And then we will actually take you through parts of the rubric and how there's a connect between the two. I will then come in and delve more into the dynamic and the play between the decision system and the stakeholder interests. We will then collectively take you through the risks that we foresee, how we believe the rubric addresses some of these risks, even mitigates them, and how some of the risks are possible open questions, and how, as the FRC, you should just be conscious of those risks as you proceed. So this is how the next 10 to 12 minutes will be laid out. And over to you.
All right, thank you, Anakapa. Okay, so in deciding what priorities we were going to help the FRC set for this decision-making process, we chose these four: feasibility, economic benefits, market capture, and public benefits. The idea behind this graphic is to show what we consider kind of a substantive criteria to meet those priorities in the middle, and then what we hope and really think should be a necessity in terms of the output. So for feasibility, does the organization or the state have the resources? That's human capital, economic capital, land, anything else that goes into the actual building of a project in order to produce a project they're capable of completing, a safe rail line, both during construction for employees and for the travelers, and an efficient solution in terms of scheduling and fares. Economic benefits, we focus on jobs and savings. Is this going to produce jobs? Likely yes. Is it going to produce jobs that help local people get to work? And then savings in the form of taxpayer dollars. Will building this railway help save money on an airport reconstruction or adding 2 lanes to a freeway every decade or two? The idea is that this too, because it's in some parts of the country a relatively new industry, this is an opportunity for innovation where public and private companies come together to form partnerships to produce new solutions, kind of change the landscape of regional travel. With that in mind, we talk about market capture. Is this going to give consumers a viable and affordable and efficient alternative to regional airways and traveling in their own vehicles? If those conditions exist, will it produce a change in consumer behavior? We'll talk at the end about how some parts of the country might respond differently to the idea that their behavior is going to change. And then public benefits, we focus mainly on urban renewal. Is having these railways going into these downtown areas of major cities going to bring about an infrastructure change, a boost of economic resources, persons, and capital to the area? And hopefully, will that improve social welfare? Will that make the education in that area better, reduce crime, get people to work? So with those in mind, we see how they relate to stakeholder interests. So Congress, first off, wants successful projects. We all want successful projects. They need them as examples of political capital. So when they authorize this funding and they help us set the priorities, they're looking for something specific. They're looking for a victory in terms of being able to get people to work and having this project be run efficiently and smoothly. The state and local governments, their proposal and completion of these projects depends on the funding availability and the perceived economic impact. A state's only going to spend $10 to $40 billion on a train line if the economic impact over the next years is going to equal that and help change the landscape of the economy. Environmental groups are there to watch, set, and enforce environmental standards. Their main interest is minimizing the negative environmental impact. And on the rubric, we'll see how we address that in a couple of areas, making sure we ask a couple questions about is the process in place for that to actually happen. And then the American people, their role is to staff and ride these trains. And they'll only do that if we provide safe, reliable, and affordable travel. So I'd like to quickly look at the rubric and talk about a couple of examples. So it's 19 questions. It's very simple. The point is that this is an efficient piece of paper. This helps you make a quick decision on, is this a reasonable proposal? Can we move forward with this group? All yes values, all yes answers are positive values, no's are 0. And we ask for the page number, simply because you're going to get a lot of proposals. The commissioner is not going to have enough time to read all of them. Some cursory glancing and evaluation should probably happen before it gets to the commissioner's desk. And here she can say, okay, the numbers to support this answer are on page 7, I can go see that. We boiled them down to simple yes or no questions in order for this to be an effective and efficient tool. So, does the grantee have commitments to match FRC grants with private or other funds? And that was listed as a priority in the documents you gave us to make sure that you're not the only people giving money to this project. That these other parties are going to be involved and make sure that it has enough capital to succeed. If we look at others, something like economic benefit, will this project stimulate local economies during and after the construction? That takes into account both a long-term and short-term goal. So we wanted to kind of give simple answers to complex questions in order for this to be a jumping off point for consideration of granting these funds. All right, on Akampa, we'll speak about stakeholder interests.
Thanks, Chris. Again, in laying out what Chris just laid out, the intent remains, and our work has been to address that intent, to look at the 4 stakeholder groups and map these interests and the roles of these groups to the 4 priorities that have been laid out by the FRC. In going through the rubric, you will see that each of these questions addresses concerns that can possibly be put forth by either of the 4 stakeholder groups, and each of these series of questions, of course, fits into the 4 priorities that have been laid out by the FRC. So again, to reiterate, that was the intent in sharing this solution with you, knowing that this is a government organization. Having said that, to understand risks and what these risks are and how they can be mitigated, we want to share with you that this is a dynamic, evolving rubric. At a certain point in time in the future, if an agency was to come up to you again and ask for more grants or to share its evaluations, this rubric is going to change. This is a starting point. This is where we begin from. In doing this, the rubric puts forth the best prepared strategy. We all know that big projects have a tendency to get derailed. Big projects have a tendency to suffer just because of the time that is involved in them. Therefore, it tries to mitigate all of those questions by putting forth such crystal clear points and saying, okay, this is what is needed to get an environmental approval. Has this already been done? This is the amount of money that a certain state government will need. Does it have confirmations towards that grant? So in that, we are proposing a best prepared strategy for FRC. It is a holistic rubric. It's holistic because it embodies all the 4 FRC priorities. It gives you a framework to identify promising grantees. Again, while in the decision-making system, and we'll be happy to work with you through this, there will be trade-offs that will come your way. There will be allocations that you may want to make to each of those priorities. As we develop the system, those priorities and trade-offs will be laid out for you. So these are some of the risks that can be mitigated by considering the rubric. Chris can share some others.
So there are a couple kind of practical implementation risks that are worth considering. One is a cultural issue. People on the West, I'm from the West Coast, people on the West Coast, we don't take trains. We don't even know trains are a possible way to get from one place to another. There might be a need, a demand even for a train from LA to San Francisco, but how long is it going to take for all of us Californians to get on that train? this is by no means a reason not to build a train in California, but something to consider. Should some of this grant money, okay, we're not only going to do construction, but we know this problem exists. Maybe you should consider giving money toward a public awareness campaign or some sort of tourism initiative surrounding the train. So it's a practical thing to think about. And the other is political risks. One of the things I love about the rubric is that since this is a presidential kind of focused project, it's going to get a lot of attention and it's going to get a lot of adverse opinions about it. But if you were to go to, say, Speaker Boehner were to come up and say, well, I don't think this is a good idea. Well, you've got it on the rubric. Well, actually, this is going to save taxpayers money. You're a Republican, you'd love that. This is going to put people to work in urban centers and get them off of entitlement programs. That's what this says. You should love that. You should get on board. It has pretty concrete, clear answers to some of these questions that are going to come up in the political fight for this. And with the idea that where to find this information in the proposals, you can look at whether either descriptive or quantitative data to support these answers. All the questions are written so that they need some sort of quantitative data or descriptor to prove these things to be true.
That's it from us. We want some questions from you, points of discussions. Happy to assist you as you go through this process with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So just to back up, can you explain maybe a little bit about how you determined those kind of 4 categories as part of the rubric? What was the thought process behind these 4? Did you consider others as you were thinking through it?
We did. We felt like they're a little broad, but they encapsulate a lot of different things. So feasibility, we talk about time and cost and schedule. We're on, one of the documents that we were given. And this idea that the resources are all of those things. So it's not just the schedule. Again, as Anna said, big projects have a tendency to get off schedule. So if we worried too much about one aspect, whether it's a bottom line money or a bottom line time, we were worried that it might not leave the opportunity to kind of further evaluate the programs. The questions on the rubric kind of try to address the many parts of these large priorities. Anything to say?
I think to sort of hit the heart of the matter here, what does a big agency need to consider when they go implement big things for the country? Well, these are the top concerns that lie forth for you, and therefore these big categories. And I think our idea and our intent was to give you a crystal clear system to understand how each of these big priorities get laid out, and therefore the questions underneath them. But we felt as an agency these would be some of the core indicators for you as you proceed.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about, I'm just kind of curious to see if you've thought through in any more detail, the questions are helpful, by the way, but the market capture part of this, I think, is quite important, obviously. I know we've just really only begun starting to think about the markets where this will take place. When you think about competitive alternatives, what are some of the KPIs or possible, performance metrics we should be thinking about to really gauge and to assess competitiveness? I see, you've called out like competitiveness against other forms of travel, but like, what would be the specific data we would really want to hone in on?
One major one would be, not to be demeaning in any way, but number of bodies moved. So if Southwest flies from the Bay Area to LA over 100 times a day, there's 200 seats on each plane, that's 20,000 people. Okay, our train's gonna be able to get 20,000 people to and from Los Angeles and San Francisco every day.
Okay.
So in terms of so there's that in terms of bodies moved. There's scheduling. Are they going to be able to have, planes taking off every 5 minutes out of Oakland? Are going to have trains taking off every 5 minutes out of San Francisco? That's a competitive note to think about, how those two tackle that problem. Fares, things like, is someone willing to go park at Oakland Airport instead of take a taxi to downtown San Francisco to the train station and then do the same in LA? So all of these marketing and experiential elements of travel would need to go into account. And that's another thing that might vary by region. And as this rubric were to develop, you could decide, well, is it an experiential thing? Is it a bodies moved? Is it a scheduling? Is it a fares? Is there a concrete number we're looking for? That as we move forward and see what people are coming to us with, I think would help guide those questions to be more specific.
So I have a question for you as well.
So I'm going to get hundreds of these proposals and grant proposals in, and conceivably 10 of them could have the same number of yeses and nos. So how does our agency discern between ties? Meaning, are there weighted components to your, which I think are 4 very good areas, but is there a weighted component to the scoring besides the yeses or no, or is the quantitative side of the ROI factored into this in a way so that I can break the tie, so to speak? How did you guys want to address those kind of issues?
Sure. That was something that we really grapple with because as your consultants, we want to give you the simplest possible sandbox. You check this and you don't check this and therefore you decide. But to get to that level of detail, there is a certain amount of precision that is needed in the decision-making process. Now, this precision can come out of geography. Are you asking us to look at a certain northeast or a southwest? Well, if you are, there is a possibility to evolve this framework to that weighted measure that you're looking at. The second aspect of this is going to be where does FRC's priorities lie? If tomorrow your political interests are dominant in the South as against the East, a part of these queries and a part of these priorities will by default be moved up because they will be like the core concerns that you are addressing. So there is a possibility of weighing this, making it a more robust sandbox that merits a deeper conversation with you, and that becomes a little more project specific. But to answer your question, yes, there is a possibility of doing that, and through this process we can take you to making a more well-informed decision.
So this is an initial paring down of the material, and then we would go into a more discerning view as we make final set of decisions.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Good. Thank you. Very good.